Welcome to the Advocacy Strategies for Key Funding. And you're going to be connecting with professionals who've held dual roles, both as funding seekers and funding administrators on the local, state, and regional levels. This panel will focus on broad strategies for success, not specific funding sources. So as far as moving forward to introducing the panel, we have Michone Preston from the Habitat for Humanity of Washington State. Michone is a collaboration, or Habitat of Humanity of Washington State is a collaboration of 30 Habitat affiliates in the state of Washington. Then we have Erika Malone. She is from the Seattle Office of Housing. Erika is a social sector professional with over 20 years experience in the affordable housing and community development arenas. And then we have Jacob Gonzales. Jacob is from the city of Pasco, and he joined the city of Pasco in 2018 and has recently been appointed as Director of the Community and Economic Development. And on the end, we have Noel Frame. Noel is from Washington Senate. So I will let Michone take it away.
I assume these are automatically on.
Yes.
Can you hear? Thank you very much. So when we were thinking about this homeownership track, we wanted to add advocacy, but a very high level, and bring people from different structures and different levels who are part of funding sources. But we recruited these three because they have vast experience, some of them not only in being the funding distributor, but also as funding seekers at different times in their career, and different experiences as advocates, like we all are as practitioners. So we have a very dynamic group, and mostly we're going to hear from them, but we want this to just be a conversation about helping us as busy practitioners figure out where the best place to spend our time is for the greatest success in advocacy. We want to hear about their structures, where they think the most important tables are for us to be sitting at, what positions we need to be watching, what the political climate is, so that we can establish the best approach for either our agencies, our staff, our lobbyists, etc. So with that, let me turn it over to Erika.
Hey, look at us, winging it. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Erika Malone. I'm the Home Ownership Division Manager at the City of Seattle's Office of Housing. I've been there about 7 years. Prior to that, I was, I think, probably where some of you are, at least, in community land trusts, both in Bellingham and Seattle. I worked nationally, advocating for public and private resources for permanently affordable homeownership. Oh my goodness. We're doing great up here. How's it going? Okay, so I'm gonna start real basic, I think. I mean, good advocacy starts with relationships and knowing who to talk to about what. And if you don't know, you ask questions. So I think it's interesting, and Michone, in her wisdom, has found sort of internal administrative people, some of us, I think Senator Frame is the exception to that rule, but I think that's right, because while you're going to be advocating for more funding sources, we're also going to be advocating for an efficient use of existing resources, right? And how funds are implemented and how they're administrated, how they can be used efficiently to do all of the things that we collectively want to do. And that's a point that I want to make, is that we're all problem solvers, and we're on your team. We all want the same thing, which is more affordable housing, more affordable home ownership, safe places for people to call home in our communities, right? So see us and your equivalent of us, your cities or counties, municipal administrators, as partners in that endeavor. So a little bit about the Seattle environment. The Seattle Office of Housing funds affordable homeownership in a myriad ways. We do provide development subsidy for permanently affordable homeownership. We provide down payment assistance, weatherization and home repair, foreclosure prevention. Most of those activities are funded by the Seattle Housing Levy. Of course, all of these things do require resources. And since 1980, voters have consistently passed that housing levy. Our next housing levy is on the ballot this November, and that is all I'm going to say about that. My comm staff is in the corner taking notes as to lest I advocate. Can't do that. Other jurisdictions in Washington have passed local housing levies, Bellingham, Vancouver, maybe others. If you are in a jurisdiction that does not have a local housing levy or a funding source for supporting the development and preservation of affordable homes, you can do that. Washington Low Income Housing Alliance has resources to help you do that. Build coalitions, where my other panelists are going to speak to some of that. Local housing development consortiums can help you make that move to create the local funding source that you might need to match Housing Trust Fund at the state level or other types of affordable housing resources. More likely than not, though, in addition to funding, you're going to be looking for administrative or program shifts, change, etc. My advice there is, again, know who the local equivalent of us is, who to talk to, and if you don't know who to talk to, ask. And read all the rules, right? We have program administrative rules. They are a pain to read through. Do it. Know the lay of the land before you come asking me or the local equivalent of me to change the rules for you. I might not always follow my own advice, as Lisa DeBrock knows, when I'm like, hey, can't we make these loans assumable for permanent affordable homes? No, because that's decided at another level. But my case in point, right? Know what level you're trying to pull the lever at. Let's see. Yeah, find out who has influence over either the program change or the funding source that you want to influence. I don't want to take up too much time. We got other smarties up here. Well, just as an example, I think, so the housing levy or other local funding sources, every 2 years, there's a housing funding policy at the city level in Seattle that is approved by city council. But it's really staff that propose those policies to the council. And we ask for public input and stakeholder input. When we ask, tell us. We really want to know. Again, we are partners in creating affordable housing with you. So we mean it. Come to the table when we invite you. Yeah, I've got a few just high-level tips, but I want to leave space for the other folks on the panel to say their piece, and I'll be back with tips later.
Cool. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jacob Gonzales, Director of Community and Economic Development at the City of Pasco, a community about 220-ish miles southeast of here, a city that's part of a rapidly growing region in the Pacific Northwest that for a very long time was able to talk about how cheap it is to live there, therefore you should move there. Except when you got there, really wasn't the case. And so up until about 2-3 minutes ago, I was kind of wondering how I got placed on this panel from the planning side, but I think I can make this work, particularly because I have a background in transportation planning, but I'll tie that in later. Pasco is a city that's been one of the fastest growing cities in the Northwest for quite some time. And so every time we get this question about why are we growing so fast, it's like, well, haven't you been paying attention? Didn't you go outside over the last 2 decades? It's a city that's basically tripled in size from the late 90s. We're gonna almost double in size by the year 2045 or so. So we're gonna become a city that went from 25,000 people in the late 90s to 145,000 people in the next 15, 20 years. And none of our policies, especially with relationship to housing, were updated over the last several decades. And so part of Pasco's journey, we kind of accidentally fell, I think, into being aggressive to address the housing crisis that our community members were facing for a very long time. I don't think that was necessarily the topic that was coming up at our local council meetings, however, unfortunately. From the outskirts, from an outside view, single-family homes, everything looks pretty, but no one really peeled back the onion a bit until we did in 2019 because of the incentive with the legislation of House Bill 1923. So we kind of accidentally fell into an incentive, hey, they're gonna give us money to do some cool nerdy mapping, let's do it. And throughout that effort, we uncovered a whole lot of problems that our community members were facing, and primarily that it was our fault that these barriers were in place. And I think that's important to emphasize that we are the regulatory barrier to a lot of the, what can you do with all these funds if there's nowhere to allocate them, right? And so I think that's honest for us to admit that. So I think over time we've become more of a facilitator than a barrier. A lot more work to do, but Pasco was successful in adopting missing middle housing, ADUs, flexible lot sizes, increasing lot coverages, all the buzzwords. We didn't use the buzzwords because we didn't want to really get trapped into that conversation at a council meeting or at a planning commission. We relied on some very basics, like our colleagues at the Pasco School District, they can't afford to live here anymore. Our colleagues at the first floor in the permit center, they're processing permits for projects that they can never own or afford to live in. And so we property rights. If you want to assure neighbors their property rights, let them do with their property maybe what they'd like to do, like build an ADU for the grandmother or their child that wants to move back to the Tri-Cities. So we relied on kind of a lot of the data indicating that these days in Pasco it was more expensive to rent a 2-bedroom apartment than for the folks that bought homes 10 years ago in their monthly mortgage. Because that sort of defeated that notion that these apartment folks are whatever. It was also an opportunity for us in the planning department to share some of our own personal experience. I myself am a renter, and several of our planning staff and community development staff are renters in a community that for a very long time had said, this is a place where you can own a home, except the home has to look like this. And that's where we've really tackled our regulatory barriers over the last several years. I'll kind of stop there, but Pasco's story is very much about how we've successfully kind of fought back against decades of a misinterpretation of what a comprehensive plan goal policy was about, let's increase access to home ownership. And what we've done over the last 2 years is say, we really don't care what kind of home it is. We just want you to have an equal opportunity to actually achieve an opportunity to even, is it even allowed to be built? And in Pasco, the answer now for the most part is yes. I think one cool fact is that our regulations before we adopted these sweeping changes essentially limited 90% of our residential lands for one type of home product, a single family detached home with a driveway that leads into a garage that has 20 feet in the front, 45 feet in the back, 10 feet on each side, and we kind of addressed that concern from community members of why does everything look the same? It's like, well, that's because that's what the code says. Right? So if you don't like it, let's change it. And a part of our success, I think, is attributed to the fact that we basically did a laugh check on our comp plan, right? And so let's look through our comp plan and find out, are we actually even achieving this, or do we not care? Because if we don't care, we can waste our time on something else, but we can stop wasting our time here. But if we do care, let's peel back the onion and remove the barriers and think differently about what we really are trying to accommodate or allow, or what we were unintentionally, or unfortunately in some cases, intentionally trying to ban. So, thank you.
Great. Well, thanks again for the invitation to be on the panel. My name is Noel Frame, and when I was talking to Michone about prepping for this, I'm like, okay, Michone, which hat am I wearing on this panel? Michone's like, all of them. And I'm like, okay, great. So I wanted to just start there and explain a little bit of sort of the many hats that I wear, which you'll quickly see a theme when I get to my points here. I am Noel Frame, State Senator from the 36th Legislative District. I represent the northwest corner of the city of Seattle. Whoop, I see a constituent. Multiple. And for those of you not familiar with the boundaries, I have the Space Needle, and then everything northwest of that, up through the Woodland Park Zoo and Greenwood, where I live. I've served in the legislature for 7 years, rounding out my 8th year now, and I'm now the vice chair of the Senate Housing Committee. So that's one hat I wear. Second hat I wear is I'm a consultant. We are a part-time citizen legislature, and so a lot of us, particularly those of us who live in Seattle, have to have other jobs to pay our rent or mortgage. And I have worked at a company called BDS Planning and Urban Design for the last almost 7 years, and had the privilege, truly the privilege, of being part of the facilitation team to facilitate the Racial Disparities in Homeownership work group that was commissioned by a proviso from Representative Jesse Johnson and Senator Tawana Nobles. And so really had this front row seat with Michone, Denise, and others to stakeholder conversations in a way that I don't often get as a legislator. So really seeing sort of all of the various interests together in conversation with one another to see if they could come up with consensus recommendations, which is a key part of our facilitation practice. And then the third hat I wear is I'm a homeowner. And I'm a homeowner who got to purchase my home with down payment assistance from the state of Washington. I will always credit Denise, our executive director of the Homeowner Resource Center, who is also my friend and neighbor, who bought her home the same way and was like, hey, you could do this too. And now it's been a decade and we're neighbors and friends and colleagues in this work. So I really do wear a lot of hats. In the legislative capacity, I'm not just vice chair of housing, but I also spend a lot of my time thinking about tax policy. Former chair of the House Finance Committee. And because housing and the idea of owning your own home it's not just a roof over your head, as we all know, because of the capitalist society that we live in, housing is also an investment. It's a financial instrument. It's a tool of investment and wealth building. And as we know, sadly, we just heard this morning in our keynote, is a tool of wealth building that has been denied through state-sanctioned discrimination for many years, and the accumulative effect of that creates the racial homeownership gap that we have today, and as a consequence, the racial wealth gap that we have. I've spent a lot of time thinking about the relationship between the opportunities for homeownership and wealth building as it relates to tax policy. So the key things I want to just highlight, sort of key themes, and I'll walk through these, is one, in all the work that we do, we have to celebrate wins along the way. But two, we also have to acknowledge what it takes to actually meet this moment. And three, we have to do it in coalition. So I know many of you know this. You wouldn't be in this room if you didn't, but you've heard the statistics. We need to build 1.1 million homes over the next 20 years, or 10 years, and half of that needs to be subsidized at some level. And while I am so grateful to my legislative colleagues for, in 2023 alone, investing $1 billion in housing, folks, it is not even close to meeting the scale of the need. We are 10 years behind in building in Washington State. We have a national crisis that we all feel locally in the cost of rent, but also the lack of availability and sort of how out of reach homeownership feels for a lot of folks. But you have to celebrate those wins along the way. And so I do want to, flag, we've had a 700% increase in investment in homeownership in 5 years. That's a cool number. Now, it's 5 million to like 40 million. So you have to be honest with ourselves, but we are making progress, right? So we should celebrate that. And we've also had some key legislative wins. We were just talking about a bill we passed a few years ago to have an exemption for the real estate excise tax when we're buying land for the purpose of affordable housing. That came to us, the draft bill, and it wasn't clear that we could use it for affordable homeownership, and through partnership with Michone and others, we amended that bill so it was very clear that key partners like Habitat for Humanity, our community land trusts, and others could use that REIT exemption to buy land. Great progress. We've heard a lot already in this conference about the Covenant Homeownership Act, and what an amazing victory that was. And I'm just gonna be real honest with y'all, that was not easy, not in the getting it together, and not in the final hours of getting it passed. It took a lot of work and a lot of political maneuvering to get that across the finish line. And we should all be really proud of what is now, will be $150 million of dedicated funding to homeownership through some very clever and thoughtful policy making that will have the impact on our BIPOC communities here in Washington State in a way that race-neutral policies just don't achieve, addressing the racial wealth gap and racial homeownership gap. That's huge. The Community Reinvestment Plan was a bill, made it into the budget as a proviso. Homeownership is another part of that. There's other pieces too, like being able to buy a business and other things, but it's there. Middle housing we've heard a lot about. That's going to create smaller units of housing. So these are all things that we should celebrate. And again, we need to acknowledge that we have more to do to meet the moment. I wanted to spend a minute talking about coalition and what it takes to do this work. Folks, if you want to advocate on anything in the legislature, if there's like you ever want to get a bill passed, doesn't matter what the topic is, if you all work it out amongst yourselves and come to us with a consensus solution, your bill's going to pass, generally speaking. It's when we have to like fight it out amongst ourselves that's where it gets really, policymaking gets really hard. But when stakeholders do the work of working out their differences and come to us, it readily moves forward. Great example. We just passed an incredible bill, which is another part of that package of small wins that we should, not small, but wins that we should celebrate. For our manufactured homeowners who have for years been screaming from the rooftops, I own my home, but I don't own the land underneath it. And the land underneath it is being bought up by corporate interests. They are jacking our rent. We have nowhere to go. We're losing our homes. And this was our investment. And we passed legislation this year that gave those homeowners the right or the opportunity to compete, to purchase the land on which their home is sitting. And frankly, I mean, it was my bill and my name's on it, but all the credit goes to the stakeholders for doing that work of negotiating it. So in this world of homeownership, I am seeing a lot of coalition work that's good. When I first started in the legislature, there was infighting within the housing advocacy community that you couldn't do homeownership because it was at the expense of investments in rental housing. I saw that all the time. And honestly, thankfully, some of that divide has disappeared. I don't think it will, the tension will always be there to some degree, but that divide has gone away. I'm seeing interest from the business community advocating for homeownership because it's a tool of wealth building, access to capital that helps people start businesses. Yours truly became an owner of my company in the last year because I had equity in my home and I could use my HELOC to buy into the business where I'd been an employee for 6 years. Amazing opportunity. So the business community is interested. Our conservative colleagues, who I often don't agree with, they don't agree with, for instance, my efforts and others on rent stabilization. And one of their favorite lines is, the best rent control is owning your home. And maybe I don't like it, but that brings them into the coalition. So let's do that. And then I just want to also flag the incredible work of the Black Home Initiative. And again, several of the members of the Black Home Initiative were also in the Racial Disparities Work Group. And just really bringing together, and frankly, I would just say, shining a light on how unacceptable the racial wealth gap and the racial homeownership gap is in a state that has been controlled by Democrats for years. It has forced us, as Democrats in power, to put a mirror up to our face and acknowledge that this state is a very hard state for working people to afford to live, particularly for members of BIPOC communities. And I think they're doing a really good job of bringing people together. The last thing I'll say on that, and then I'm done, I swear. When I talk about meeting the moment and I talk about tax policy, one of the proposals I've put forward, and I think there's a real opportunity for those of you who care about homeownership to come into an unlikely coalition with folks you've probably never worked with and policy area that you've never thought about, which is tax policy. I put forward a proposal twice now called the Washington State Wealth Tax. And for folks that are not familiar with that, quick tax policy 101. We are all familiar with the REIT tax, correct? When you sell real estate, or you sell your home, for instance, you pay a real estate excise tax, the transaction tax when you sell. And we also all pay on the ownership of our home, correct? We're all familiar with the property tax? Yeah, so we all pay, for the privilege of ownership of our homes, we pay tax. On the capital side, or the financial side, where you have financial assets, like stock and interest in a privately held company and other financial instruments, we just passed the capital gains tax. And so now there's a tax on the sale of capital or financial assets. But there's a gaping hole in the last quadrant, is there is no tax on the privilege of ownership of financial assets. So all of us who have the privilege of owning a home and using that as a tool of our wealth building as a middle class, we're all paying tax on our assets, and the assets that are used to build wealth for millionaires and billionaires, publicly traded stock, chief among them, is completely untaxed. Folks, this would raise billions of dollars, billions with a B, per year. And if you start asking folks who are doing all these projections on what it's going to cost to build 1.1 million units, it's not $400 million a year, which is what we put into the capital budget this year. it's multiple billions of dollars a year. So I invite you all to think about the role that you could play in the coalition of meeting the moment of the funding it's going to take to actually make homeownership affordable and accessible to our communities, as well as funding and solving broader needs for housing on the renter side as well. So with that, I'll stop. Thanks, Michone.
Okay, if you'd like to weigh in after, now that if you've got more that you'd like to say before we open it up for some Q&A, I want to just give you an opportunity.
Sure, why not? I'd say, heck yeah. Thanks, Noel. Senator Frame. I've just got some high-level tips. I mean, I think most of this probably goes without saying, but I've got a microphone, so here I go. And I think I said it before, and it is about relationships in coalition, in knowing who your legislators are, knowing who the administrators are, finding out who the people are, and building and creating authentic relationships, finding shared and common ground within coalition and within and among decision makers as well. If we get hitched as administrators or elected officials to your cause, we can advocate internally for that. Help us do that by telling us your stories, giving us the data, knowing the lay of the land. We want to be a partner in that, and I'm going to repeat that for real. Let's see. Yeah, state problems as you see them, but come with solutions, we see problems too, and we don't always see clearly the way to solve them as clearly as Noel does, because, yeah, I'm on board. Let's see. If be strategic, but not duplicitous. If you get stonewalled by me, there's probably a reason for that, right? And if I stonewall you or ghost you or whatever, and you need to go around me, tell me you're going to do that. Because then I'm like, oh, that's why that happened. Oops. And that, I think, just builds trust, right? Be persistent and stalwart in your advocacy, and we will get on board, right? Make us see the cause that we all share. That's all I got. Those are my high-level tips. All right. Silly. What you got?
Yeah, I guess I'll try to follow that up. Pasco's been really fortunate to have a lot of interested stakeholder organizations and partner groups helping advocate on behalf of the work in the region. We've developed a really great relationship with our health district as they adopt their own community health needs assessment, and housing and homelessness was number one on their identified needs. We work closely with our housing authority. We work very close trying to align our community development block grant funding to actually use for housing production. We're working right now really close with our transit agency and the port district, because the port is now becoming limited on who they can attract, because the question they get from all these new potential industrial or employers is, great, you got plenty of land, it's really cheap to develop there, where's my workforce going to live? Are they going to have to travel more than 20, 30 miles to actually get here? And that's where we've developed a really cool partnership with the Department of Commerce and Washington State Department of Transportation, where we've started changing our transportation development standards and policies so that we can create more walkable neighborhoods that are conducive for more housing. And I realize I'm saying this in a part of the state where you've got a lot more walkable neighborhoods than where I'm at, but to go from 0 to 1 in Tri-Cities is really, really, really hard. It's going from cul-de-sacs and lollipop neighborhoods to, can we at least make these roads go straight? That would be a cool thing. And one of the things that we've done on the housing side to tie into that was anywhere that there's a public transportation facility, anywhere, which is the route, because the stop can change over time, anywhere that there's a park, anywhere that there's an educational facility or a health-related service like a Planned Parenthood, an urgent care, or a hospital, we've allowed increased density and a lot more housing flexibility within a quarter mile of those areas, because ideally, you can decrease the VMT, you can decrease the need to get in a car and drive. And one of the things that we struggle with beyond just the cost of housing in Pasco is that of the top 20 cities in the state of Washington, at least in 2020, Pasco was like number 3 or number 4 in terms of how much of household income was needed for vehicles. So the transportation aspect, which is the second highest cost, is a big problem for a lot of our, our residents and therefore our employers. And so one of the unique things that we got over the last couple of months with kind of updating both housing and transportation policies and regulations at the same time was a little bit of kudos from the State Department of Transportation on our efforts to reduce VMT reduction, which is obviously a great thing for all of us to try to achieve. So we've really tried to expand who was in sort of our partnership group, who's on the team. And when you talk about deregulating outdated housing policies, you bring a lot of folks to the table. And then when you talk about let's reduce VMT, let's get more access to transportation transportation and transit, you get a lot more. Basically, the tent is growing bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's led to a lot of success in Pasco. I think one thing that I wanted to share with this group is that when we talk about increasing access to home ownership, it's more than your whatever the perception is of a single-family detached home. City of Pasco right now has 88 townhomes. We only have 88 townhomes in Pasco, and it was built like in 2002, so it can't afford them anymore. Right now, because of the recent changes we've done, we've got roughly 1,200 that'll likely be up and ready the next couple of years. So we've essentially gone from 100 to a lot more. So we've increased access to homeownership. So that would be worth sharing.
I think the one thing I'll add, just listening to Erika and Jacob to reflect back, is that I talked a lot about coalition and finding unlikely allies, but I'll also add that there's room for everyone in this fight. There's plenty of work to go around. So, and everybody has unique expertise that they bring to this. I mean, what Jacob and Erika were just talking about, like, I don't know that stuff. I don't have that level of expertise and knowledge. I'm not working on the ground and implementing this work. I knew that we needed to like free up zoning, right, and like allow these things to happen. But believe me, when we worked on the middle housing legislation, I mean, the amount of technical work that we had to do really in coalition with like every level of government, tons of stakeholders, et cetera. So my like broader message is, if you want to be part of the broader efforts to increase home ownership, you certainly have something unique to contribute. That's sort of one half. And then the other half is invest in coalition management. It's not enough to just have a bunch of people and organizations and stakeholders that care, but you've really got to invest collectively in organizing yourselves. P.S. That's a specialty expertise. You can't just get anybody off the street to do coalition management. It takes a lot of patience and a lot of organizing skill. And it's great work. I think one of the biggest challenges I've seen, again, across policy and issue areas in my almost 8 years in the legislature, is when you've got stakeholders that are just like generally rowing in the same direction, but they're not talking to one another. That's when you have progress that's really slowed down. If you want to really capture the moment, capture momentum, invest in what it takes to talk to one another and to deliver a common message.
Lots of food for thought. Lots of food for thought. So we've heard about the political climate, a lot of different partnerships, specifically about Pasco, what you've done to just build the capacity is just amazing. Let's take some questions from the audience.
Thank you. Thank you very much, panelists. My question, I'm wondering if the panelists can talk a little bit about the timing of advocacy and sort of, we're all very aware when legislative session is happening, but what do we need to be doing with the rest of the year? What's the right kind of timing? And is it different if your bill is, like a bill like middle housing versus something that's related to the budget? And I'm curious about from the local level and also from the state level.
And speaker, would you mind identifying yourself?
My name is Denise Rodriguez. I'm with Washington Homeownership Resource Center. If you are interested in becoming part of the Black Home Initiative, there is a booth in the sponsor area. We would love to have you. If you want to connect with us, if you're curious about advocacy and you don't know where to start, I will personally help you get up to speed and help you connect with whatever resources are available to help you with that. So please come see us at our booth. That's it.
So I think we'll all be able to answer this in different ways because literally the cadence of policymaking is different at different levels of government. I have, of course, am at the state level, and we are, again, a part-time citizen legislature. We meet every winter, and we alternate January to April for the 105-day session, or January to about March for the 60-day session. We do the 60-day sessions in even years, which are election years, so that we can go then do our business on campaigning. And the message that we always emphasize is talk to us in the interim. Like, come talk to us well ahead of the legislative session. Have us do tours. Bring us in, invite us to your coalition meeting so we can meet from you and hear from you. Because once we get into that legislative session, it is such a fast pace. And the 60-day session, I almost can't breathe. I mean, it is so fast. The minute one deadline passes, literally 5 to 7 days later, there's another deadline. And it's really hard to keep your head above water as a legislator, let alone a stakeholder. So we always encourage people to come to us well ahead of time. I think one of my Advocacy 201 pieces that I've had to learn the hard way as a legislator is talk to the agencies too. The agencies the executive branch has a whole separate process they do decision packages, they then submit to the governor, the governor does his process and they come up with the proposed governor's budget. And if you're asking for money, it is exponentially easier if you are in the governor's budget. And if you're not in the governor's budget, but you are in the agency decision package, helping us as legislators understand the agency can't technically advocate for this because it didn't make it into the governor's budget, but there's a whole well-worked proposal right over here on the shelf, legislator, that you can drop into a bill if you would like, which I've done several times, right? So really understanding the cadence of each of the agency, the executive branch budgeting process, our process. I will just say, as a former chair of a committee, I don't think I completely appreciated pre-file bills as much as I did once I was the chair of a committee. Because I'm definitely that person that I let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and I'm trying to get everything right with my bill before I file it. And then I learned the hard way early in my legislative career, way to go, Frame, you just lost the opportunity to get a hearing because you waited so long that you didn't get it. And so as a chair, it was great when I'm great, bills are pre-filed or filed on the first day of session. I can just schedule those in right away. Don't know what's gonna happen to them ultimately, but they fill a slot. So there's things like that that are really helpful for outside stakeholders to really understand about the cadence of the legislative process at the state level.
Yeah, from a smaller community, perspective, Mondays at 7 o'clock in front of council is the best time. But, I think really, from a broader perspective, in terms of housing advocacy, in the sense that we need a bunch of all of it, I think all of the time is when we want that input to be received, so that we can share it with our policymakers and with staff to know that this is always going to be a priority for us, because the reality is, for several decades, we've heard quite a bit about not allowing new housing, and it's worked. And what I certainly would encourage, be easy on the staff, but is having the opposite begin to happen, which is where we have folks consistently reminding us that just because you were successful on 1, 2, and 3, don't forget about 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 on those list of recommended strategies. So from a very local level, I think we certainly appreciate having our partner organizations and our stakeholders, our community members who are impacted, who have never really had the opportunity to share their concerns or how they're impacted with policymakers. I would encourage that to happen all day, every day.
Yeah, I would. Hi. To echo what Jacob said, and I think I'm sort of struggling with what to share about the Seattle structure, how similar it is. It turns out proximity. How similar it might be to some of your communities. I break every microphone I touch. What is happening? You can hear me, right? Yeah. There we go. Recording can't. Okay, good. Yes, to second what Jacob is saying, talk to us all the time if you can. And by us, and so again, I'm city administrative staff, Office of Housing, and an office of the mayor. The city council is a separate legislative body, and so you know who your council members are, know who their staff are. Really critical, again, what? Authentic relationships. Be where they are. Housing development consortiums. I'm not sure how many there are around the state. The local Seattle King County has a homeownership affinity group. Office of Housing, King County, and the Finance Commission all are there on a monthly basis, hearing from stakeholders, letting folks know about funding rounds that we have coming up. Again, I think when we invite public and stakeholder opinion and participation, show up. Yeah, that's what I got.
+1 to the staff comment. With the Seattle City Council, King County Council, these are exceptions that their electeds are full-time. Our small cities, our legislature, we're all part-time. So that staff, they're the ones that are full-time. They're the deep experts on policy. Any elected official in the state that's worth anything knows that the staff is who actually runs the world, and respects them and loves them, and So having authentic relationships with the staff and understanding sort of the processes behind the scene of you can work with an elected to get authorized to work directly with staff to move the ball forward, really important stuff.
Another question?
Thank you very much. Ann Campbell, Managing Director of the Homeownership Unit at Commerce. It is so great to hear y'all this morning. I wanted to just double down on what the panelist was saying as far as talking with your public officials. City of Seattle public officials are on the website, so go to the website and Google Office of Housing to see who's who. Same with Commerce. And to shed some light on the question about advocacy and policy and when should that start, all the time. Decision packages, however, for state agencies is where the state agency submits a request to the governor's office for inclusion in the governor's budget in December. That process, the technical writing part of that process, starts in June. Some of us keep running lists and tell our staff to keep running lists all year round as issues come up, so that we know that when those decision package time comes, because we're also given very short period of time to write those up, is that we already have those topics because we talk to all of you and we hear what you have to say. I also want to double down on what Erika was saying about, even if there's something that you are advocating for that you don't think that we would prefer, if you let us know, you might be surprised by the answer. I have been very fortunate to have built trusted relationships with my stakeholder groups, so they will tell me stuff, which I appreciate. And to be perfectly honest, homeownership is my passion, so I advocate all the time for homeownership. Even for the stuff that's not technically commerce policy, I will advocate for, because homeownership is important, and stances change over time, and part of that is education and inclusion, and everybody's time is really limited. So what we can do, talk all the time, and know that conversations that happen now, today, in October, may be revisited in January, February, or March, or conversations that happen in August may pop up again in December. And on the pre-filed bills that Senator Frame was referring to, if you go to leg.wa.gov, starting December 1st, they start popping up. So you can look at what's pending and weigh in, to be perfectly honest.
Other questions?
Can I just add one thing?
Yes.
Just to add on to what Ann was saying, when I said at some point, I think I said be consistent, be steadfast, be persistent, also be patient, because things take time. It doesn't mean give up because it doesn't happen right away. I mean, so many bills take several sessions to pass, and it's very unusual, like the Covenant Homeownership Act, that it would pass in the first time it tried. But sometimes things take time. Don't give up. Be persistent, also be patient with the individuals. That's.
Hi, can you guys hear me? Okay. Hi, I'm Sarah Clark. I'm the Director of Policy at the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce. And my question is really about ways that the business community can support this work. We have a very progressive membership of businesses who deeply understand the impact of the housing crisis on our workforce community and on the development of our economy overall. But I think we've been a little bit hesitant to weigh in. We're not the experts, we're not impacted communities, but we would like to support. So if you have any advice on how the business community can help, I'd love to hear. Thanks.
Sarah, thank you for the invitation to make this ask. I'll just say out loud, when I first introduced the wealth tax proposal in 2021, I actually really appreciated that the Seattle Chamber and other business associations didn't weigh in because it didn't really directly affect their membership. And often that's the cause that associations are like, we only engage when it affects our membership. And because it was a tax on individuals only, and again, we're talking 700 taxpayers under the current proposal, which is the taxes exempts the first $250 million of assets. I want to say that again. The tax proposal exempts the first $250 million of value, which means y'all are not going to pay it. Okay, it affects 700 taxpayers in the state of Washington by our projections, which means we have 100 billionaires in Washington state, which I don't know about you all, but when I first got that data back from our Department of Revenue and their projections, I was rocked at my core because I struggle with the world that we live in and the abject poverty that we see every day on our streets, literally in the shadow of the homes and the businesses of billionaires, right? So I want to say thank you to the Chamber for not having that knee-jerk reaction no originally. And I really want to invite the community in because I think a lot of times our business community engages when the tax policy does affect them, and much of our tax policy is fee-based, which we often in the business community weigh in and say, sure, we'll do this thing that's transportation tax, gas tax, it's fee-based, it's deeply regressive. And so while I appreciate the advocacy of the business community saying we'll pay our fair share, well, it also spreads that burden out to our lowest income residents. And we have the worst tax code in the nation. We have the most regressive tax code in the nation, which means our lowest income residents pay disproportionate amount of tax compared to our wealthiest. Dead last in the country, y'all. We are the worst. We are one of the wealthiest states in the nation. We have one of the best economies in the nation. And it is on the backs of working people. We all know that because we feel it every day and we see it. I would love to see the business community really engage and say, you know what? We have residents here, and yes, they have been leaders in building businesses, and yes, they're doing philanthropy. Philanthropy is not enough to meet this moment. It needs to be an all hands on deck where everybody is asked to pay what they owe. And people that have the privilege of owning homes or are renters and pay it as part of the rent, we are paying in through property tax. I do not understand why we exempt an entire class of assets from the property tax, which is what I'm trying to fix. The business community could be critical partners in that, in dispelling inaccurate information about, they say, oh, well, the billionaires will move. Data doesn't actually support that, y'all. They may do some tax avoidance behavior, because they're rich people, tax avoidance behavior, it's real. We've discounted that, and we still raise billions of dollars a year. So I think the business community stands a real opportunity to not just partner with philanthropists, but partner with those in our community who have benefited the most from the labor of the people of Washington state, who have benefited the most from the assets in the state of Washington that we've all paid into, and do their part to really, I think, start a movement in this country that starts to turn the tide on distribution of wealth and who pays and who doesn't into public assets. Billionaires and ultramillionaires are not paying what they owe, folks. And we have a ready tax code to solve the problem. We just need to have the wherewithal to do it, and we'd welcome partners from the business community. I'm like Ann, I advocate all the time. Ann, you and me, all the time. Advocate.
I will merely, thank you, Sarah, for the invitation as well. I will merely again state the fact that the Seattle housing levy is on the ballot this fall. But someone else might be able to say something more.
unsolicited comment and question from the audience, but the Seattle Housing Levy is on the ballot coming up in November, and definitely need everyone in this room to vote for it. Get active with phone banking and all of the other advocacy tools available to us. If you are local to Seattle, that means that you have access to the Housing Development Consortium of Seattle-King County's website and their leadership on advocacy around supporting this. So there's phone banks happening. I know Habitat for Humanity is doing phone banks. HDC is doing phone banks. So get really active in that and support that. It is a critical source of funding that supports all kinds of tools to both keep homeowners in their homes and prevent foreclosure, and then also create new homes, help people connect with down payment assistance. I think a lot of the activity for us, we see a huge difference because Seattle has that housing levy available. So please vote and get engaged.
All right, we want to save some time at the end because those of you who live in these districts want to come and meet these people individually before our next class. So thank you to each one of you for being on this panel, the added time on already very full plates that this took. We're grateful to you. Let's give them a round of applause.